to start the webinar. Welcome, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO of Weaving Influence, and I'm so thrilled today to be joined by authors Lisa Fain, Laura Grealish, and Tamra Chandler. We're going to get started with our event in a few minutes, but we want to give everyone a chance to come in. And as you're coming in this afternoon or this morning or whatever coast you're on or wherever you are in the world, I hope you'll take a moment to find the chat. We would love to have some conversation with you in the chat today. And if you can take care to use the drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees, that way everyone on the webinar will be able to see your comments throughout today's event. And I would love to have you shout out where you're calling in from today. I am calling in from rainy Michigan, and I know that Lisa and Laura and Tamra all live in the Seattle, Washington area. I'm fairly certain that you're all in Seattle today. Is that right?
I'm in California.
Oh my goodness, I was wrong. Where are you, Laura?
Oh, yeah, I'm outside of Seattle, but I was shaking my head because I know Tamara's in sunny California. Look at this: Brookfield, North Carolina, Ohio, Alaska, Minneapolis.
Chicago. Shout out to Chicago, folks. That's my last home.
Oh,
Wow. Looks like we have some people in Canada. Wow. So welcome to all of you. We're so thrilled that you're choosing to invest some time learning with us. Wow. It's going so fast. Hi, Kristen in Kansas City. I haven't seen you in a while. We have a caller in India. So we're so glad that you've joined us today. And I know it's going to be a really wonderful conversation. If you should choose to live tweet during today's event to share any of your insights on Twitter, I don't know if we have a hashtag, so you can make one up. Just teasing. We'd love to see your insights. Please, if you want to tag me at Becky RBNSN, or you can tag at Weave Influence. We'd love to see your insights from today's conversation. So a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. We are recording today's event, and we will be sharing the recording in a follow-up email later tomorrow. We also have a few slides today, and we can share those as a PDF in case you'd like. So no need to scramble to take notes. We'll share all the slides as a PDF after today's event. So before we get started, I want to share with you a little bit about each of these wonderful people on the call with me today. Tamra Chandler and Laura Grealish co-authored the book. Now let's see if I can get the title right. Lisa's going to hold it up. Feedback and Other Dirty Words, Why We Fear It, How to Fix It. And did I say it right? I was reading it off the cover. I promoted the book when it came out. I should have it down by now. And Lisa Fain is the author with her co-author, Lois Zachary, of the book, Bridging Differences for Better Mentoring. And the idea for this webinar came together when Lisa and Laura and Tamra all met for the first time and discovered all the amazing synergy between what they all do in the world. And so that's why we're having this conversation today. So thanks for joining us, and we're going to dive in. And later on in today's call, we will give you the opportunity if you would like to speak face-to-face with all the authors. And we'll use the hand raise function later on and then bring you over so that you can be a panelist and talk face-to-face about any questions that you have related to mentoring and feedback. So are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
All right. Well, we're going to start at the top with a really big question. Why is feedback important, and why do we need to fix it?
Oh, such a great question and a good one to start with. I think of feedback anymore as like a superpower. Like if we can actually embrace feedback in the way that we'll talk about it today as a really strong force for positive growth and improvement and progress and momentum. It makes us better leaders. It makes us better people. It makes us better groups. Our relationships get better. And when we even look at the hard data, organizations that really embrace a positive culture of feedback, a growth-oriented culture of feedback, outperform those that don't 2 to 1. Leaders are ranked higher. Like the numbers support it, but our heart supports it, I think, as well.
So I think we were going to take a look at a definition of feedback and then get some input from our attendees on the call about how often they might be experiencing feedback according to this definition.
I love that. I think I'm sharing. Am I sharing?
You are.
Mhm.
Okay, what do you see? Let me see. Why don't I go into the
Not the
slideshow looking at what
Yeah,
I was
it's
doing?
like, there you go.
It's not that, it's not that, we're talking about feedback today with Lisa and Becky and everybody every day. And what we noticed when we wrote the book about feedback is that, we don't all have the same definition. We don't all come at it from the same lens and the same experience over time. And so when we wrote the book about feedback, Tamra had done a lot of research across the world in performance management and helping companies and people just like you, kind of blow up this idea of the performance review as the only form of feedback. But companies were very interested in doing feedback better, but they were just so afraid of it. People said, I just don't like it. It's just not great. It's not a gift for me. And so we thought, we need to rethink feedback in its very definition. And we're posing this definition, and I'll read it to you with intent that, we propose that we need to rethink feedback so that it's clear and specific. It's information, something that's either sought or extended with only one purpose, the purpose of helping people, groups, relationships improve, grow, or get better. Now, pause there, and we would love to hear from you.
We would.
Think about feedback in your own perspective. We would love to hear. How does that fit?
Our question today says, how does the way you experience feedback align or differ with this definition? So maybe you say aligned. This is pretty much the way I operate, and the way I experience feedback is aligned with this definition. Or potentially maybe sometimes the way I give or get feedback feels like this, or no, or not. I guess it says my experience with feedback is very different. And if you have any comments, we'd love to see those in the chat as well. So we'll give you a few moments to answer this poll.
So it's so interesting as stuff is coming in, just, what's missing from this definition on purpose is it's not about criticism, right? I mean, it's such a clear contrast to this feeling of, somebody asking, which so many of us have experienced, is like, can I give you feedback? And you're preparing for that sucker punch, right? This definition just, softens that so much, which is really terrific.
Absolutely, Lisa. And that when Laura and I were doing this work, that's what we realized is we have feedback so wrong, and we have the definition of it wrong. And we've experienced it in those wrong ways since we were small children on the playground, and we've grown up with it that way. The thing I like to say to people when you're thinking about this is, when you start talking about feedback, if you get in a conversation about feedback, people will start to label it. Well, that was positive feedback, or that was negative feedback, or that was constructive feedback, or that was blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
If we lean into this definition, we do not need to label it. This is feedback. It doesn't need to be labeled. And if it doesn't help you grow, improve, advance, move in a forward direction, then it's not feedback. It was something else. It was criticism. It was somebody's ego. It was whatever showed up for you that day. And so my mission in life is if we can get to a place where people will quit labeling feedback and trying to bucket it in like, oh, I need to have a negative feedback conversation, then, we'll have succeeded.
I love that.
Well, let's take a look at these results. It looks like the biggest percentage of people said maybe sometimes the way I give or get feedback feels like this. And looks like about a third of people say that their experience is aligned to this definition. I thought there was a really interesting comment from Wendy. She said she would add a fourth option. So the way she gives feedback is aligned to the definition, but the way she has received feedback is not aligned.
We should update the poll. I agree. I think that
I love that. Exactly. And we want to dig a little deeper and ask this next question. And so if you answered maybe or not, tell us why. Tell us more, because we're gathering research. We're working with folks like you all over the world. What in your culture or in your world isn't it hitting? I love what the chat just said.
So here is the question. So if you answered not
or maybe,
or maybe. Tell us more. So feedback I get or give isn't very clear or specific. I don't know what to do with it. I don't trust that the feedback I get is intended to help me grow. The feedback I give is intended to point out mistakes so someone doesn't do that thing again. Or the feedback I get feels like punishment or blame, not a good thing. And Jenna says more like all of the above.
Multiple choice, multiple choice.
You can pick them all.
Yeah, and that's what we're up against, right? Is like, how do you change? You guys go ahead and vote and pick them all if it makes. How do you change the definition of a word and rethink it and start to behave in a different way? Language changes, the culture changes, words change, but that's our mission, is to get to a place where we are giving and getting and seeking feedback for that reason.
So it looks like the most popular answer here is around the feedback not being very clear or specific.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's an interesting element, particularly of Western cultures, because of course feedback varies around the world based on the cultures that people grow up in. Right. But in Western cultures particularly, we have this theory, it's deep down in our souls, and we have to sort of pull it up and smash it, that we help people get better by telling them what they did wrong. And when we look at the research, there's actually nothing that supports that. If someone's about to drive off a cliff, you need to stop them. You need to help them from going off the cliff. But mostly in our day-to-day work, we're not about to go off a cliff. We need to actually have the feedback that helps us understand our strengths and our passions and where we're at our best. And the more that we understand that, the more we bring it forward and the better we get. So I think we have to let go of that. If I tell you what you're doing wrong, I'm going to make you a better human, and lean into, if I tell you what you're doing right, I'm going to watch you soar.
Yeah. There's a great comment in the chat from Teresa that I just want to highlight. She said, sometimes any feedback veering away from positive feedback may still lead others receiving it as criticism based on the receiver's level of previous trauma or experiences. This is such a great point, Teresa, because in addition to being aligned, right, feedback is also a product of our own biases. So understanding and having it be culturally, not just culturally relevant, but relevant authentically to the receiver. And that's one of the reasons that I'm, as somebody who's invested in mentoring for inclusion, is so excited about Tamra and Laura's book, is that this idea of catering your feedback as you get to know your mentoring partner is so, so, so important.
I'm giggling at the note from Sandy because I'm wondering what's behind it. Does this apply to teenagers? But it's interesting because I've started asking people, like when I'm doing podcasts and things, tell me about a time where you got a piece of feedback that was like maybe changed your life or changed the way you saw yourself, or was a moment. And what is so interesting to me, I would tell you 9 times out of 10, it comes from something that happened when they were a teenager. And it's usually someone who stops and says, I'm watching you sort of, wreck yourself over here. But what I know is that you are a good human. You are an amazing person. You have these strengths. I see that in you. And I want you to lean into that and move away from this chaos you're creating over here. And that I have heard that so many times in these stories, that somebody, often a teacher or a coach or somebody in someone's teenage life, stopped and said, I don't think you're that person you're sort of showing up as right now. I think you're this person. And it really made a big difference in people's perceptions of themselves.
Yeah, I love it. I'm intrigued also by Kevin's comment here, which is that intent is not the same as impact. Kevin, you are 100% right. And that's why creating trust in a relationship and really getting to know one another is so important in effective feedback. You can't offer feedback without this foundation of both psychological and interaction safety.
Absolutely. And checking your own intent, right? Check your intent before you offer it. Check it up against that new definition. Is it really about them, or is this something about you? We know that a large percentage of feedback that we give others is really about us. It really is. And knowing yourself, Lisa, you were talking about past traumas and receiving, doing the work to, make feedback a good thing for you means doing the work as a receiver and going, what triggers me? What sets me up? And what am I learning from my past that I don't want to go through anymore? Yeah, was it that feedback from my dad that said this or that? And getting through that is really important.
Yeah. Lisa, I want to go back, and I'm curious your perspective of this too, that comment about criticism, because it is so on point. And when we wrote the book, Laura and I really, we fell in love with Folkman and Zinger. I don't know if people have followed them from their leadership research, but Folkman and Zinger have done some amazing research that looks at how leaders, the success of leaders and how leaders are ranked or, valued by their employees. And what was interesting was they looked at leaders who gave mostly positive feedback, leaders who gave mostly, feedback that's aimed to fix something, or leaders that did a blend of both. And while if we self-report as people, we'll say we want leaders that really correct us and tell us to go the right path. But yet when we reflect back on the leaders we love, our favorite leaders, the ones who we think help us do the best work, are those who give us mostly positive feedback. So it was really interesting because how we self-report it is not the same as how we actually experience it. We sort of, even in that little soul thing I talked about earlier, we even think we should be just told all the time what we're doing wrong. And we aren't very good, at taking hold of those things that we're doing right.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because as I think about, the feedback that I've received in my own career, in some ways, it is the negative or the constructive feedback. It's all constructive. The negative feedback that was framed in a positive way, right? I mean, I'm not even sure that the line between positive and negative feedback, when feedback is delivered artfully, is quite so clear, right? Because I do think that if it's really formulated for your growth and development, it's there's something really special there about it being a collaborative experience, that you build upon it, where the line just isn't so clear because there is that trust, and it's just, as you said, it's not a capital F feedback conversation, right? It's a lowercase f feedback conversation that happens in the course of something that's much greater than that.
Yeah. I love that. It's all feedback. It's all connection. Trust. People are saying, gosh, if I don't have trust in the chat, it doesn't make sense. And you're absolutely right. And you can't build that trust. Positive feedback doesn't mean there's nothing to be corrected. Amen, Carrie. That's exactly right. I mean, people will say, does this mean I can't have the hard conversations? Absolutely not. They're essential. They're hard conversations that are going to help your relationship or your behavior or your company grow. Absolutely, that's feedback. And there is a skillful way, science-based, to have those conversations. We know now from science that certain words and certain even gestures can spin up, right, the chemical cocktail that absolutely puts people in a triggered moment, and it feels like a physical assault. And changing the way we have these conversations to build trust is possible. But we know so much now about science and the generation of the oxytocin in the brain that actually makes people feel more trusting. And that's the type of words that we use, and that conversation rather than the telling and selling and the finger pointing,
There's a question from Michael about how does this differ from day-to-day coaching and the Ken Blanchard? And I can't say I know exactly the details of Ken Blanchard's piece, but I can say the spirit, I think, is the same, because when we change that definition of feedback, it gets to be about the little moments. And that's, Laura started talking about busting up the annual review. That is not feedback. The annual review is a train wreck over there. Let's just set that aside. What feedback is those little tiny moments. And I totally agree with what you said, Lisa. We no longer can label it because it's just the conversation that we're having. It's that we both understand we're moving together, or as a team, we're moving together in this direction, and we're providing people noticing and witnessing that is helping us move that way. And it no longer becomes flavored with, what does that mean? It just means it's helping us make progress and go this direction. And it really, the power is in the moments. And it was kind of one of the epiphanies that I had when we were working on this book, is that I'm not good at those big, let's sit in the room and put a box of Kleenexes in the room and have this big, heart to heart that leaves us both drained. I'm much better in the moment, in the day, helping people move forward. And I finally kind of got to clear with that, that actually is goodness. I need to own that. And now when I'm working with someone new, as we're building that trust, that mentoring relationship, just having that conversation of, this is the nature of how we're going to help each other go forward. This is what feedback means in our relationship. And if we need to have a big conversation, you ask me, we'll sit down and do it. But beyond that, it is the day to day. It's the way we help each other just kind of get through the day and move forward.
Yeah, Tamra, one of the things that I love about what you said is that it brings up a really fundamental part of a mentoring relationship, which is taking the time at the outset. And if you already have an existing mentoring relationship, it's never too late to do this, to set the ground rules, which I can't even tell you the amount of pushback that I get about that. This is true even in informal mentoring relationships. If you say, in order for this mentoring relationship to work, we have to have ongoing conversations about what's working, what's not working. And actually that is a fundamental ground rule that we really each need to agree to. Then it becomes a third thing that you can refer to and dig in. I like to say that there's a mentor, a mentee, and a mentoring relationship, and the mentor and the mentee co-create that mentoring relationship. And if you set the foundation of that mentoring relationship as, we're going to have ongoing conversations about what's working and what's not working, and free reign, free permission, a no-fault conversation, then you really set the stage, for that as well. So I love that you said that. There's also this great question from Amanda that I'm so curious, Laura and Tamra, for your perspective on. She says, I'm excited to hear about how I can take the me out of it when I give others feedback. I really get in the way of this, and I know it. What are your thoughts on that one?
To take the me out of it, take my ego, take what I need out of it. Yeah. I think it comes down to checking your intent. I think it comes down to relationship. A lot of us believe that it's our job to correct and perfect others. We're here to say that's not your job as a manager, to point out people's flaws and fix them. That, of course, the dog is going to talk to me. I'm going to put this on mute. I'm sorry. Tamra, take it away.
I think, we joke a lot about check yourself before you wreck yourself. And so I think, to Laura's point on intent, you have to kind of pause. I think there's that quiet space that you have to take and say, why am I offering this now? Is now the right time? Is this the right thing to be offering? And kind of go back to that definition and say, if it's not meeting that, then there's probably something going on. And we're all human, we all have bad days and points that we think are critical that we make that probably aren't. But I think the best thing we can do is just kind of always take that moment to check our intent. And
yeah. And sorry for the dog. He hates Amazon, but your question is so good, and me is in the conversation, and people say feedback's not personal, and you know what, it is. But the other thing we can do as feedback extenders, right? We're going to show you this conversation model later. It is actually be very mindful yourself of what's coming up for you. We call it noticing, right? Notice what's coming up for you before you have a conversation. Try to get to the context of it and ask yourself, is this about me? Am I trying to prove something, or am I trying to help them improve? Tamra has a wonderful image, proving to improving. Why am I sharing this now? And then you go into the, what's the one piece, what's the one message I want to convey here? And what did I notice, witness, or observe? You can only share, you do have to share your me, right? This is what I noticed yesterday. You know, I noticed this interrupting in a conference call the other day, and you do have to share the me. I felt dismissed. I felt discouraged. I felt whatever. You can give that as feedback, and then you got to open it up and hear from the other person. What, you know, did you notice that? What could you do differently next time? So I think you don't remove yourself. You're part of the conversation, but you do have to check your intent. You might be, you know, giving feedback for a better connection and a better relationship, not necessarily just to fix that person's behavior.
Becky, I know we had some questions that we had thought through initially.
Well, yeah, and I'm trying to, there's so much good in the chat. And so I'm just trying to figure out where we go and proceed. But I know one of the topics that we really wanted to get to was the role of conversation and feedback. And we've started to touch on that, but I wonder if we can go back to that and dig a bit deeper about the role of conversation in feedback, particularly as it relates to mentoring relationships.
Lisa, did you want me to show your fabulous conversation?
Yeah, that'd be great, Laura. Thank you. Yeah, I think what Laura's referring to, oh, did you need something before did you do that?
No, go ahead. I'm just getting lined up.
I think what Laura's referring to is a model that we use at Center for Mentoring Excellence a lot, which is about the 5 levels of conversation. And, you know, what we believe is that good mentoring rests on good conversation. And I know from reading Laura and Tamra's book, good feedback rests on good conversation too, right? And so in order to have good conversation, you really have to have learning and trust. And we sort of view there being 5 stages of conversation. And I'm sure you all can resonate with each of these. But the first level of conversation isn't really a conversation at all. It's this idea of monologue. It looks a lot like this, right? Like the in my day, this is how it was done, or here's what I think you should do. Here's what I did. You know, but so there's a lot of shoulds in the monologue phase. Learning is really low. It often happens when there's not trust, and also typically happens when you haven't had a lot of time with your mentoring partner. The next level is transaction, and the visual for transaction, I'm a really visual person, so I like to kind of attach visuals to all of these, is the idea of a checklist, right? And if you haven't taken the time to build trust in a mentoring relationship, it can be a lot like, you know, so Becky, last meeting we talked about this. How was it? Great. Check. What did you do this? Yes. Check. How was it? Great. Check. What's the next topic? Check, check, check. And there's a back and forth, but there's really no ahas. There's no learning. There's no depth. The next level, which is the level that often people default to, mentoring partners default to, if they haven't taken the time to set up the foundation, a foundation of ongoing feedback, a foundation of safety, a foundation of trust, is interaction. Usually gets past the transactional phase, but interaction is a little bit like ping pong, where, yeah, there's some more questions. Nobody's holding on to the ball that long, and there's not really learning. So you got a little bit more to talk about. So Becky says she completed the last task that we talked about, and I might ask a question or two about what's next. But there's not this, what is the insight? But where good conversation happens, and thus where good mentoring and good feedback conversations happen, is in the next 2 phases, collaborative engagement and dialogue. And collaborative engagement is where there's really deep learning on one person's side and curiosity on the side of the other person. So as a mentor, I might ask some more questions. And if Becky were my mentee, she might have some insights and say, yeah, you know, when I did that, I really started to learn more about, you know, where I should be working or what's going on with my team. And, you know, it gives me this question, and we start to have more of a conversation about that. The sweet spot where so few conversations are and so many conversations would benefit from being is in dialogue, where there really is, you know, harnessing the benefit of the reciprocity of mentoring, which is what really distinguishes it from coaching and distinguishes it in some ways from supervisory relationships as well, where there's really deep learning on both sides. And I might say, gosh, Becky, that learning really caused me to think through something that I've been struggling with here as well. And you see that how early on in the relationship, you may not be able to get to collaborative engagement and dialogue because you're just building trust. But if you find your relationship slipping into interaction, what you know is you have to go back and take the time to build trust to get to collaboration and dialogue. So that's the model. I'm wondering, Tamra and Laura, how does this relate to your thinking on feedback?
It is absolutely the way we think about feedback. And I love your model and the book that you and your mom wrote. And our model was also, conversation model was influenced by Judith Glaser and her conversational intelligence, and that this kind of building of trust through conversation is exactly where we want to go. The frustrating part is that, you know, we expect managers of people and peers of people to have all those answers, and they don't. Like you said, we hope that trust feedback can become this collaborative conversation. And our model actually says, state the one thing, state the noticing, but then go into conversation. Most of the work we do with clients is about creating better questions and being better listeners. And that trust, people will say, how can I trust feedback from someone that I don't really know? It's tough. Getting to that deeper collaborative connection is exactly the key to good feedback. And it can't just be point and shoot.
Yeah, 100%.
I really love the model, Lisa, and I think so often we get stuck in that transactionary kind of space, right? Particularly if we are operating within organizational constructs that are telling us we have to have these kind of conversations, and it becomes very much like check, check, check. We did the things we were supposed to do, and we've moved on, and those then never end up being, good relationships that are actually going to help us in achieving whatever it is we're working to achieve. I'm curious too, because I love all that. And I think in the mentoring relationships, it's so important. But I think sometimes those mentoring relationships can start with the people you do trust. And in my career, I've leaned a lot on my peers who know me really well, who've sat through the tough stuff with me, whether that's collectively as something we're doing as an organization or something that any of us have personally gone through. And those relationships, they're the people that can really, give you just a tiny little tidbit that might change your life or change the way you're thinking about the moment or how you're showing up. So I think sometimes really thinking about, in your work, you've got the mentoring relationships that may be more formal, but also thinking about the mentoring relationships that maybe are less formal, but use all the same things are there, right? And that maybe we can fast start some of that with some of those people we already trust.
Yeah, for sure. I think having this sense of curiosity in the peer relationships and the informal relationships can be really, really important. And it's true that there's such a value in the informal as well as the formal. Also, I think one of the beauties of peer mentoring, whether it's a feedback conversation, is there's not the same power differential that there is in a mentoring relationship. And so there's less of an inclination for a mentee to say, I want to be in the image of my mentor, right? Right? I mean, when it's a peer, it's just there's a little bit more of there can be a little bit more of a kind of give back that way. So.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes back to, and Laura, maybe you could pull up the thing on seeking, because there was some really wonderful chat happening there about people starting their own feedback momentum, as I would say, by going out and seeking feedback. And one of the things that we strongly encourage is that we start as seekers and we get really clear on what it is that we need are looking for, and we seek that. And that can be through those peer mentoring relationships or through, the work that Lisa's doing and making sure that mentees are taking that accountability to come into that relationship clear with what is it that they're seeking. And also mentors can really become those coaches and collaborators in kind of processing any of that feedback that we seek and we receive.
Let's talk about that a little bit. We're talking about mentors and feedback, but one of the things we know that makes for a better feedback environment, helps generate trust, is that when we quit waiting for someone to hit us with an epiphany or a criticism or something and start asking. One of the things we can do to run into this movement of making feedback a good thing is to actually ask for it. And people struggle with that. I struggle with that, particularly if you have a feedback relationship or past that hasn't been very beneficial. And people say, why the hell would I ask for that kind of stuff? And so we would love to hear from you about seeking feedback. If you're not traditionally someone who goes out and asks for mentoring, advice, feedback, etc., why not? What's holding you back? This is multiple choices. Is it just not something that's done at your office or around your culture? You don't have the time. A lot of us don't. I'm anxious about what I might hear. That's typical for me. I honestly don't care what others think. Be honest. I already know my own strengths and weaknesses. I've had negative experiences in the past, or I've never gotten anything that really helped me. Multiple choice. Tell us about you.
We'll give some time. And while we're waiting for people to answer the poll, I'd love to hear from each of you about, if seeking feedback is something that we'd want to do more of, what's your guidance and how to ask for feedback in an ongoing way?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question, Becky. I think the important thing is, and Laura mentioned it earlier, this idea of one thing. We have a habit of going out and asking these really open-ended questions. How am I doing? Or what feedback do you have for me, right? And when you ask a question like that, you just crank the fear up in the person you've just asked because they have no idea what you're looking for. Have you had a bad day and you just want me to tell you you're an amazing person? Are you really looking for something specific? Do you think there's something wrong in our relationship? Like what's behind the question? So just like when we provide or offer anyone feedback, we need it to be clear and specific. We need to ask for something really targeted. And when we were doing this work at People Firm, because we were kind of eating our own dog food and trying to lean into this as a momentum, it was interesting to me that of our leaders, when we started this, a lot of them had to really take a moment and say, well, what is it I want feedback on? Like we don't, we have to really do that inner reflection of, it's about me and I need to be thinking about it. Now, you may say, hey, is there one thing that is a blind spot to me? That may still be opening up the conversation. But again, it's a targeted ask. So I think we need to really keep it focused. And the really good practice is to ask in advance. So if I said to Lisa, hey, tomorrow when we're going to have a conversation, I'd love your insights on ... And then that gives Lisa the chance to think about it and not be in a fear response mode. And it's going to create much better insights in a conversation that we can have because we both come prepared for it.
Absolutely. I think also one of our tips is expand your sources. We tend to make the mistake of asking one person everything for all our feedback, right? We're trained that way. It's my manager knows everything. Or we ask one specific question of many people. How are my presentation skills? Expand your sources too. Focus your ask, but create your mentoring board of directors and maybe reach out for one specific thing from your boss, but something maybe something entirely different from a peer that you could learn from. So expanding your own sources, and reach outside your comfort zone, right? Don't always ask the people who look like you or who act like you for feedback about you. bust your own biases.
Before
Okay,
we go to
results are in.
before we go to those, I just want to I think the corollary to what Tamra was saying is it make it clear how you need to if you need to process. It can be really helpful. I had a mentee who's very introverted, and she really needed to process things. And I operate in a very different way. I'm an external processor, and I tend to think probably too quickly. And so what she said to me is, "This is really helpful. I need time to process it and think through it. Please don't take my silence as me disagreeing." So in addition to how you want, to the advance of asking is the advance of processing and allowing for that time on the other end as well.
Know your feedback self. Absolutely, Lisa.
Yeah.
I had a t-shirt on the other day that Tamra said, stand up. And in our workshops, we take a little assessment on knowing your feedback self. And, this is the receiving side. This is what spins me up. This is the one thing I want others to know about me and feedback. And my t-shirt says, but first, let me overreact. I will. And people
hang on while I overthink this, right?
Right? Some people don't. I think Tamra's was, feedback for me should not be first thing in the morning. I can take it, but don't hit me first thing in the morning. So letting people, know and give you space to experience it. Absolutely.
The other thing that I love when we speak to around the receiving side, because we all are seekers, receivers, and extenders of feedback. And so we need to work on our skills in all of those areas, and all of us do. And in receiving, the other one I love, which kind of ties to your mentees coaching of you, Lisa, what is this idea of feedback short, reflection long. And I think oftentimes it's those, again, if it's a little thing, a little nugget that you receive, it often takes time to really chew on it and to get all the value out of it. And also those are great things to bring into your mentoring relationships, because if somebody gave you a little nugget that you're kind of gnawing on, talking that through with a mentor can help. And then even, again, to Laura's point, going out and maybe validating it with other sources. I talk about, I had a moment where when I was still at Hitachi Consulting, that we were working on some strategy work, and I was doing this initiative around what we're calling workforce of the future. And one of my colleagues who knew me super well, as we were ending a meeting that we've been talking about these ideas, all she said to me was, "I haven't seen you this excited about anything in a long time." And then she threw the rest of her stuff in her bag and she walked out the door. And I just started to process that. And then I started to ask other people. And then I started to think about it and talk to my husband and, all those things. And in the end, I ended up leaving Hitachi Consulting and launching a new consulting company, because I realized I hadn't been that excited about anything in a long time. And that one little tiny nugget that you take the time to think about can be the diamond, And so anyway, something there.
And trusting in yourself, right? How wonderful for the mentee to be able to say, Lisa, I need time to process. I see in the chat, people are saying, I'm getting stronger about saying I need to process, or I can take in some feedback, but what's the one message you want me to hear right now? Help me process, one thing. Or what's true for me in that. I like what Tamra says about that feedback short and then reflection long. We really need to be able to trust ourselves to say, what do I find true in that? What's triggering me about that? And what nugget can I find true? Or do I find truth in it? And maybe I don't. And then maybe it's feedback that wasn't meant for you or not meant for your growth. And you get to own that, right? You don't have to take every piece of feedback and advice that comes your way. Because we get it all the time, right?
Well, Becky asked about seekers of feedback, but there's something in the answers you've given that resonates for me in terms of the deliverer of feedback. And, you mentioned check yourself before you wreck yourself from, the great sage Ice Cube, or a little bit earlier. I think that there's an assumption piece here, right? Like one of the things, that in the example that I gave, I was realizing that I was making assumptions about my mentee's lack of reaction. And there's an inclusive behavior skill that I teach a lot when I do sort of inclusive training about inclusion, which is this idea of name the dynamic, right? So if you, as the deliverer of feedback, see the glassy eyes, or you see the wondering, or you see the leaning back, or the tears,
Yeah.
be specific about the behavior you're observing and ask about it rather than make an assumption about it. Well, I notice, Laura, that this is really triggering you. I'm noticing the tears. What's that about?
There you go.
Right? Or I'm noticing a change in your body language, Tamra. Can you tell me more what's going on in your head? A, it's a trust builder. Yeah. B, you're checking your assumptions. And C, you'll probably come to something that's going to help the seeker, the receiver of the feedback, really process that feedback in a way that's more resonant.
Brilliant. Yeah. Absolutely. Just being mindful and noticing and being in that moment, and being able to name it. Like you said, name what's happening, name your thoughts and feelings. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And it's back to the conversation, right? It's back to, we're talking about this. Neither of us are right and neither of us are wrong. It's an exploration that we're in together.
So we did promise our attendees that we would bring some over to talk face-to-face with the authors today. So I want to give you the chance. We have about 12 minutes left. We have lots of questions and topics still to cover, and we want to honor the commitment that we made to let some of you speak face-to-face with Lisa and Laura and Tamra. So if you'd like to use the hand raise function, I'd be happy to bring you over so you can ask a question and talk with the authors. And while we're doing that, we had shared the results of the poll, and the number one thing that people were reacting to was they don't want to seek feedback because they're worried, fearful of what they're going to hear. Potentially, while we're bringing some folks over, that could be a question you could answer.
Oh, and how do you get over that? Our advice is you start by seeking. You start figuring out what it is that you're looking for, and what your past triggers and issues and emotions are, and start safe. Start with someone who you do trust. I mean, I can't ask for blind spotting from, someone that has never worked with me before. Start somewhere safe and easy, and don't be afraid to start asking for the good stuff, right? Why don't we ask for appreciation or ask for acknowledgement? It's okay. Ask for, you know what, Tamra, I just did something amazing the other day, and I want to know, did you, how did you feel? What did you react? Was that good? Did I do a good job? It's okay to ask that. Ask for the good stuff first and get used to it, because you've got some good stuff out there.
Great. So welcome. I'm not quite sure how to say your name, so I'll let you introduce yourself and speak.
Hi, I'm Anu Khanna. Thanks for the great thoughts here. I would love to hear about your what you think about what's the difference between mentoring and feedback.
Lisa, you take that.
Yeah. So I think they are so intertwined. I thought you were going to ask a different question, Anu, about the difference between mentoring and coaching. So I'm happy to have the question asked in the way that you asked it. Feedback is an essential part of mentoring. I mean, mentoring is a developmental relationship, right? A relationship that's focused ultimately on the development, the growth of the mentee. And you can't grow unless you understand how you are perceived. One of the things that I love about mentoring is, unlike a supervisory relationship that's focused on performance, mentoring is focused on the other elements of career success, which is image and exposure. And right, your image in the organization, how you are perceived within the organization, which is a result also of sometimes institutional bias, and exposure to opportunities. And so feedback really is such an important part of mentoring because it helps you realize how is it that you are perceived, right? And how can you change that perception in an authentic way? That's the kicker that a lot of people miss, as opposed to being melded into somebody that the organization, a square peg in a round hole, so to speak, so that you are exposed to opportunities that can help, either increase equity or foster your development and growth. So it's such a great question, Anu, because feedback is a huge component of the mentoring relationship and is essential to an effective mentoring relationship.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining, Anu. Sheila, you can speak next if you'd like to unmute.
Yes, good morning or good afternoon, I should say. First, you ladies are amazing. I've been in training and development for over 25 years, and I think you know how much I admire and appreciate you coming up with this practical formula to have these conversations. My question is similar to what Anu had asked, because it was what you were thinking, Lisa. I heard elements of coaching in this conversation as a mentor, as a leader, or even as the receiver. So I was curious as to, when you think about not labeling it, just the conversation itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you as a seeker, when you're the giver, the extender, and even as you're, receiving, but as a seeker, I'm finding a lot of managers are struggling with how do they get that very concise in a way where they're maybe coaching up or, needing that specific feedback, or there's an element of trust that something's not quite gelling there. Any thoughts around that or suggestions, advice, or tips?
Sheila, I don't know if this is getting at what you're looking for, but one idea that I was going to offer earlier when we were talking about how we sort of mitigate the fear of getting started. And I'm a giant believer in start at the team level. And so if you're a leader who is, has a team reporting to you, just starting to create habits or practices that start to build some of that muscle is super important. And it feels much easier than going right at, direct personal feedback, if you will. So, and that could even be the easiest way to start is with a gratitude practice, right? And at the end of every meeting, we stop for a little gratitude, or at the beginning of meetings, we just do some shout outs for the people that we're working with. Maybe we start meetings with gratitude, we end meetings with what could we do better to be more efficient in this meeting? Or we start to get into practices. If we're presenting a project or a plan, we stop and ask, like, somebody put on a black hat and help me understand why this isn't going to work. Like, we just need to start creating practices that make a safe environment for us to share and for those to be explored and received in the conversation about it, right? And that starts to build that muscle. And then we can start to lean more into, hey, you had a great point in the meeting the other day about why that project, I just really love your insights. Could you and I start having more conversations that help us each get better, right? And we can just start to move. It's like a snowball. We start to build more of that and move from there.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sheila. Appreciate you joining us today.
Sure.
If there are any others who want to come over as panelists to ask a question, I'll be happy to call on you. We also did have an email question that came in before the event that I wanted to make sure we got to. The question said, with a focus on diversity and inclusion, we recognize that even positive feedback can look different than what we traditionally expect. So how do we recognize diversity in feedback and make that a part of mentoring conversations?
Yeah.
Lisa, you've been doing such good stuff here. Talk about that.
Thank you. I love this question because it gets to the point that context is everything, right? I mean, feedback does not happen in the absence of context. And the truth is, feedback between any two people, I could give the same feedback to Becky as I give to Laura, and it's a different conversation. It's received differently. So the first thing is for the giver of the feedback to ask questions about how it's received and what they might be missing. No feedback that given is a truth, right? It is the truth for the person who's giving it, but it isn't the truth, right? It is a truth. And so asking what another truth might be, right? So I might say, Laura, this is how this landed with me. What am I missing? How is this different from you, right? I know, and this is where trust comes in and timing comes in, right? I think really, start asking those questions, taking the time to get to know one another is super essential. But really recognizing that there is an enormous window of information that anybody doesn't know they don't know. And that's where you really need to kind of, again, check yourself before you wreck yourself, and check in about your own assumptions as the giver of feedback on the receiver of feedback. As the receiver of feedback, because we know that there's going to already be trust there, to be able to say, Laura, that hits a nerve with me. Let me tell you why that hits a nerve with me. You really touched on something that's been an issue for me my whole life. And I'm not sure you really understand that this is a part of my background. I really would like to share that with you. I think it goes both ways. And again, unless there's interaction safety and psychological safety, it ain't going to happen.
Right. And
Right.
you got to start small with that sharing of your own thoughts and feelings. And back to what Sheila asked, we as, organizations and groups, we don't do a good job of giving people space and time to share their own thoughts and emotional feelings, where I think we're seeing it come a little bit more to the forefront now with all the, the COVID kind of activities, but actually starting a meeting or a conversation with, where's your head right now emotionally? What are you feeling? And this might not be the time to
So
talk.
Monica is here, and we have time for a brief question before the end of the hour. Monica, do you want to unmute and speak? Monica, we'd love to hear your question if you are able to unmute. In the meantime, Laura, could you show us the final slide?
Oh, I will. Yes.
All right, we're so grateful to all of you for joining us today, and we would love to invite you to find out more about the work that Lisa, Laura, and Tamra are doing in the world. You'll see in the chat we have a link to Center for Mentoring Excellence, which is Lisa's organization. We also have a link to Tamra's new thought leadership website at tamrachandler.com, and also links to the 2 books, Feedback and Other Dirty Words, and Bridging Differences for Better Mentoring. We hope you'll take a look at all the resources and engage more after this event with Lisa, Tamra, and Laura. So thank you so much for investing part of your day with us, and I hope that you've learned a lot that can equip you to give, receive, and seek feedback in a better way, particularly in your mentoring relationships. So ladies, do you have any parting wisdom or thoughts that you'd like people to take away?
Just thank you for spending time with us today.
Yeah. Thank you
For the
all.
great and insightful comments in the chat. Really, there's a lot of experience in
We
this
need
room.
to publish the chat. That was just
Publish the chat, get Lisa's book. It is amazing workbook. This is fabulous.
Yes, I told Laura and Tamra that I was a fangirl before I actually spoke to them. So it's great to have this great mutual community of understanding.
Yeah, stay in touch, everyone.
Take care, all.
Becky.
Thank you.